What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we have got our Week 10 NFL game picks, outright versus the spread, along with our locks of the week. So make sure to tune in, and if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to see our live thoughts as we get closer to these games and how we are personally betting them. And better yet, go to our website at alldaypigskin.com, sign up for our free newsletter, and get access to these picks early on in the week. All those details in the description. But for now, let's get right into it. Before getting into our breakdowns, I want to give you guys a quick word from our sponsors at Overlay Fantasy Sports, who are taking DFS to a whole nother level. And I specifically want to highlight their matchup shop function, which is an absolute blast. In fact, we've been using it since the start of the NFL season because, let's face it, betting on the same old Team A versus Team B can get a little bit stale, a little bit boring. Well, that's not even close to being the case with the matchup shop of Overlay Fantasy, as it allows you to bet on individual player matchups, and it's super simple. Just pick whichever player you think will have the higher fantasy performance. And just like a regular bet would work, check out the spreads, do your research, and then win some money. You can bet on pretty much any single sport that you want, whether it's NFL, golf, MLB, etc. All those options are there. And again, super simple. Pretty much for any single NFL game coming up, you've got a bunch of different matchups that are always updated and added to. So if it's something as simple as just putting a single submission, you can do that. But guess what? If you want to get a parlay going and double up some of those winnings, you can do that as well. So take advantage of this. All of that homework you're doing for your fantasy lineups, let's have that translate to some big time winnings for your wallet as well. So do yourself a favor and check out Overlay Fantasy's matchup shop now. Our first game of the week featured the Indianapolis Colts at the Tennessee Titans on Thursday night. The Colts 5-3 coming off a loss to the Ravens, while the Titans 6-2 coming off a win over the Chicago Bears. And this was a game where, if you follow us on Twitter at AllDayPigskin or signed up, better yet, for a free newsletter at alldaypigskin.com, you get early access to our picks. You knew that we liked the Tennessee Titans because this was a series that we said it'll probably be split with the home team getting the advantage in each matchup. And we said the X factor here would be the play of Phillip Rivers. And initially, it was looking like what we had predicted in terms of the Tennessee Titans offensively having the more astute playmakers in guys like Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown and even Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith and the efficient play of Ryan Tannehill. It was trending their way, but then slowly there was a big touchdown drop from A.J. Brown, and then special team issues came up with a shagged punt and then a punt blocked for a touchdown, and kind of that's all she wrote for the Tennessee Titans. The Colts pulled away afterwards behind big days from Naheem Hines. And the great play from Phillip Rivers, he did end up being that X factor, the guy that decided this game because he played mistake-free football. And with that, the Colts actually ended up getting the victory not only outright, but also on the spread. Looking at Sunday, we start with the Houston Texans at the Cleveland Browns. The Texans 2-6 coming off their second win of the season, where they were relatively impressive offensively, but let's keep in mind it was versus the Jaguars after all. While the Browns 5-3 coming off the bye week, couple things to monitor here. First and foremost, the likely return of Nick Chubb, which should give them a nice boost offensively, especially in the rushing department. But maybe even more important is the fact that the Browns had an undisclosed individual test positive for COVID maybe puts the status of this game a bit up in the air, but as of right now, set to take place. So we continue with our breakdown. And speaking of that breakdown, I want to start with the comparison of the skill positions for these two teams, because outside of quarterback, I honestly believe that the Browns hold the advantage from top to bottom compared to the Texans, from running back, especially with the return of Nick Chubb now, to tight end, to wide receiver, even without Odell Beckham. They've still got Jarvis Landry. They've got, like I said, a plethora of tight ends that they can be used as great pass catchers. And you can split Kareem Hunt out wide as well. offensive line in addition to that, and the defense as a whole, because honestly, even in their win versus the Jaguars last week, we continue to see that the Texans struggle defensively. That's been an issue since the start of the season. I could see a lot of points being put up here. Now the question is, Baker Mayfield versus Deshaun Watson. Will that gap be big enough, small enough to overcome for one of these guys? And even though Baker has been inconsistent, even though Deshaun Watson is more accurate, more versatile, more explosive in terms of down the field plays, I have to give the overall advantage to the Browns. I think all those other skill position player advantages narrow that gap. And this is a friendly defensive matchup for Baker Mayfield. Now, you could argue that the Texans without David Johnson maybe are a little bit better with Duke Johnson, as he has played well for them when needed. David Johnson hasn't really been getting it done, but I still don't think that's enough of an advantage at the running back position. Still, it's Duke Johnson versus Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, so that's not really that big of a factor here for me. Yes, you've got Brandon Cooks. Yes, you've got Will Fuller versus maybe just Jarvis Landry. But like I said, the Browns have so much depth at other offensive positions that I'm not all that worried about that. So for this reason, I will take the Browns outright. However, I will hedge my bets here a little bit on the spread right now, -3.5 in favor of the Browns, because Baker Mayfield could very well fail to impress, while we know that Watson can produce some big plays relatively quickly with pieces like Cooks and Fuller. So for that reason, I will take the Texans on the spread. Next up, we got the Washington football team at the Detroit Lions. Washington 2-6, coming off a tough loss versus the Giants, where they also lost Kyle Allen for the season. So it's officially Alex Smith time in Washington. While the Lions 3-5, bad loss to the Vikings. They let Dalvin Cook have his way with them, but that's been an issue for them all year long. Defensively, they are a liability. So it actually might come to some as a surprise that the Lions are favored in this game at -4.5. And I think that just kind of has to do with a knee-jerk reaction of people saying, well, Washington is down to Alex Smith, who's coming off a career-altering injury. But we've been saying this since the start of the year. Smith is actually the best quarterback on this Washington roster, more so than Haskins, more so than Kyle Allen. And yes, he doesn't have as much experience this season compared to Stafford in terms of starts, but compared to the other Washington quarterbacks, he's the most experienced of the bunch. And maybe even more importantly, he's so good at avoiding unnecessary turnovers that put that defense in compromised situations. And that's going to be a big deal because the Lions, yes, they've got the more experienced quarterback this season in particular, and probably the one with better weapons. But that's even a question mark this week because Kenny Golladay likely won't be suiting up again. So that leaves, guys like Marvin Jones, Amendola, Hawkinson. Yes, the emerging DeAndre Swift, but this Washington defense is a good unit. And on the other side, well, Washington has its fair share of weapons in Gibson, McKissick, McLaurin, and most importantly, they've got a great matchup. This Detroit defense is pretty beatable. So what we're trying to say is we really like Washington to pull off the upset here. I'm taking them outright. I absolutely love them on the spread with Detroit at -4.5. So this is one of our first upsets of the week. Moving on, we've got the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Green Bay Packers. Probably one of the easier games on the week to predict because the Jaguars 1-7. Sure, they kind of hung in there versus the Texans, ultimately losing. But even with Luton under center replacing Minshew, that defense continues to be the Achilles heel. It cannot stop anybody defensively. And now you face the Green Bay Packers, who are 6-2, took care of business versus the 49ers last week. And I absolutely anticipate that the trio of Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, and Devontae Adams will eat versus this atrocious Jacksonville defense. I see no other way around it, honestly. And while the Packers, sure, they have their own issues defensively, especially versus the rush, this is a good matchup for James Robinson. My question is, for how long will that be the case? Because at some point, I think it's fair to say that the Jaguars will be forced to abandon the run, as they'll likely need to throw to catch up. And if that's the case, it'll fall on the shoulders of Luton for Jacksonville, And this Green Bay defense is not as generous as that of the Houston Texans that the Jaguars faced last week. Simply put, the Packers are the better team from top to bottom. And at the end of the day, you've got Rodgers versus Luton. So translation, go with the Packers confidently. The spread is a bit high at minus 13.5, but we're not scared off by that. In an inexperienced quarterback traveling to Lambeau to face this great offense, I will hammer the Packers outright and on the spread. Continuing on, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles at the New York Giants, an NFC East divisional clash. And even though these two teams only have 5 combined wins between each other, they both still have a chance to win this division. The Eagles 3-4-1 coming off the bye, the Giants 2-7 continuing their streak of only being able to beat Washington on the year. This is the second time these two teams are playing. Only played a couple weeks ago in a game that was very close, and the Giants had a real chance to win it. But now I think this is shifting more in favor of the Eagles, primarily because they are expected to get some of their offensive starters back. In particular, this includes guys like Alshon Jeffrey, Jalen Reagor, but most importantly, Miles Sanders at the running back position. And that is a big deal because he is a true workhorse dual threat running back. And all those additions should help Carson Wentz a bit as well. For the Giants, to give them some love, look, they've played their last couple of opponents very close. Washington, the Bucks, the Eagles. And honestly, when they've gone up versus divisional opponents, again, it's been tight games where the Giants have had chances to win. The big question here in this matchup will be which quarterback limits their turnovers better. Because despite all those turnovers that Wentz had versus the Giants only a couple of weeks ago, the Eagles still won. So I have to think that if Wentz cuts down on those just a bit, the Eagles will definitely get the win outright. On the spread is where it's interesting. Because the Giants at plus 3.5, I do believe they've got a little bit of an underrated defense. We know they've got the weapons offensively. It'll all come down to the turnovers and sacks from Daniel Jones. But this should be a close game, folks. I think some of those offensive starters that are returning might be a bit limited for the Eagles in their first game back here after a multi-week absence. So I'm trying to take that into account here. The two teams know each other well. This game is in New York. I'm actually going to go with the Giants on the spread. The game's right now at plus 3.5, but the Eagles outright. Next up, we got the Tampa Bay Bucks at the Carolina Panthers, another divisional clash. The Bucks 6-3 got absolutely embarrassed last week versus the Saints. Couldn't score a single touchdown. But lucky for them, now they get a more manageable opponent in the Panthers, who, to be fair, they're 3-6, but they continue to hang in there regardless of the competition. Gave the Chiefs a hell of a scare. They had a chance to win that game late, but ultimately came up short. Now, the big news for them is they will be without Christian McCaffrey yet again in this contest. Now a shoulder injury. And honestly, I think that this will be a situation where the Bucks come out firing. I just don't think that Tampa Bay and specifically Tom Brady will have 2 disappointing games in a row. And honestly, statistically speaking, that doesn't happen for Tom Brady. He doesn't have multiple games in a row where he fails to score touchdowns, where the offense fails to score, over 10 points in a game. So I think that this is going to be a game where the Bucks come out with a vengeance. They already beat the Panthers once. I think they've gotten better since then. I anticipate that this is where we're going to see, if anywhere this season, that breakout Antonio Brown game. Like we said last week, the Panthers struggle with speed in terms of wide receivers, and I think Antonio Brown falls in that category for Tampa Bay. And we know that the Panthers struggle against the rush. So I think establishing Ronald Jones and Fournette will be a big priority for the Tampa Bay Bucks. And when that happens, that will even more so open things up through the air for Tom Brady. I love the Bucks in this game. I think that they win big, they win comfortably. And for that reason, I love them outright. Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, the Panthers don't have enough guys to defend them. And I think that Tom Brady will have a much more successful outing. I think this defense will also do a good job of limiting Mike Davis. Yes, they've still got Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore and Teddy Bridgewater with some decent play as of late, but I don't think that will be enough for the Carolina Panthers. Give me the Bucks here outright. I love them in that spot. The Panthers plus 5.5. I think that should be a bigger number. First time the Bucks play, they beat them by, I believe, 14 points. I think this can be a 10-point margin of victory. Give me the Bucks on the spread as well. Next, we've got the Buffalo Bills at the Arizona Cardinals. The Bills 7-2, huge win for them last week as they took advantage of a porous Seattle defense and absolutely went crazy offensively. In all honesty, we think that they can do it again here versus the Cardinals, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Arizona 5-3, coming off a tough loss to the Dolphins. But hey, favorably for them, Kyler Murray continues to play at a very high level every single week and keeps his team in games. What he can do with his legs and with his arm is a reminder of what we saw from Lamar Jackson last season. Honestly, Kyler Murray could very well get to that 1,000-yard rushing mark on the year. It'll be very curious to keep a track of. And we know that the Buffalo Bills struggle with their rush defense. But honestly, breaking down this game, it should be one of the highest scoring affairs of the week. I feel very confident in saying that. Josh Allen versus Kyler Murray. Both these guys have some really nice weapons. Whether the Cardinals get Kenyon Drake back or not, I don't think that's that big of a deal. I think Chase Edmonds can also do some nice things. So I'm not all that worried about that situation. This game will come down to an aerial showdown. And honestly, I have to give the slight advantage to Josh Allen here. I think he's got the better group of weapons. And honestly, the slightly better defense, especially at that secondary level. But look, to be fair, this game is essentially a pick 'em at this point in time. The Cardinals at -1.5 on the spread. So it's admittedly a coin flip, and we can see both teams winning. But like we said, we think the Bills have that advantage in terms of weapons, the better defense. So our best advice here, honestly, would probably just be to take the over on the point. That seems like the best lock here. But whoever you like outright, just go ahead and take them on the spread. For us, that is the Bills. Moving on, we have got the Denver Broncos at the Las Vegas Raiders in what we believe will be an underrated divisional clash. The Broncos 3-5 coming off a tough loss versus the Falcons, while the Raiders 5-3 coming off a nail biter where they could have very well lost to the Chargers, but ultimately it goes their way. Now the Raiders -4.5 point favorites, and while yes, we do like them outright, let's preface it with that. We think that this game could very well be a one-possession type of scenario where both teams have to battle it out late in the fourth quarter. Because the Raiders, when they've won, they haven't blown out anyone. And these two teams know each other very well. The divisional aspect of this, so you continue to lower that number when it comes to the spread. Like we said, the Raiders at -4.5. But as far as the matchup itself, look, some reasons why you should feel comfortable taking the Broncos on the spread, which is what we will do ultimately. They're going to get some help back in the secondary. And offensively, some of those young wide receivers coming into their own. Jerry Jeudy, Patrick, Hamler. We know they can get it done on the ground with Gordon and Lindsey. It just depends on who has the hot hand. For the Raiders, they're kind of void of a true number one wide receiver. They don't have that Jeudy type. Yes, they've got Nelson Aguilar, but will he be consistent in this game? It's pretty much Darren Waller for them, but thankfully they've got the efficient play of Derek Carr, which is what gives us faith in them to get this victory. And also the fact that Josh Jacobs, we believe, can get it done versus the Broncos on the ground and alleviate some pressure on the passing attack. So like we said, we're going to take the Raiders outright. But on the spread, we really like the Denver Broncos in what should be a very tight game. Moving on, we've got the LA Chargers at the Miami Dolphins. The Chargers, 2-6, continue to find new gut-wrenching ways to lose games. This last week versus the Raiders, it seemed like at the last second they had the game won for it to only get turned over after review. While the Dolphins, 5-3, now 2-0 under Tua, as they got a huge win over the Arizona Cardinals. That defense continues to step up and really help them put together some of these nice victories. Now, obviously, the big storyline here will be the battle of these two top 10 picks, Herbert versus Tua. And unfortunately for the Chargers, even though we've seen some great play from Herbert, it has not translated into success. For the Dolphins, they're going to be without Gaskin, another game at the running back position, but could potentially get Breda back, which I think will be a nice filler. And Preston Williams will be out, suffers that injury last week. Might be done for the year, honestly. But they've still got Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki. They've got some weapons there. And I think that if the Raiders, with their issues they have offensively at the wide receiver position, can, have success versus this Chargers defense, so can the Dolphins. And honestly, right now, I'm just not sure how you can pick the Chargers in this game. Yes, Herbert has a few games more played than Tua, and he's aired it out more successfully. But this is simply a team, the Chargers, that cannot put together a full 4 quarters of play. Now, the Miami defense, on the other side, they have, like we said, played really well as of late. And we think even a small advantage like that can be crucial in a game that will for sure be very close one way or the other. And on top of this, we do expect that Tua will continuously get better little by little as he gets more experience in each one of these games. So for that reason, we're going to take the Miami Dolphins outright. The spread at -2.5. It might be tempting to take the Chargers knowing their history of these close games, but the spread is so low that it doesn't make sense to take the Chargers on the spread. So for that reason, we're rolling with the Dolphins outright and on the spread. Moving on to another divisional clash, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals at the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Bengals 2-5-1 coming off the bye, while the Steelers 8-0 still undefeated, even though they got a hell of a scare versus the Dallas Cowboys of all teams. But hey, maybe that's exactly what they needed to refocus and get back to some dominant football, which we think they can definitely do here versus the Bengals. Now, don't get us wrong. We think the Bengals have a lot of talent offensively, but that offensive line is still an issue, and they're playing versus the best defense in the NFL. This is going to be the toughest challenge Joe Burrow has faced all season long, and on top of that, he has to do it on the road in Pittsburgh. That is a tall task. Now, whether this is for the better or for the worse, Joe Mixon probably doesn't play in this game, but we've said we think Giovanni Bernard is the better overall running back in this offense, especially as a pass catcher. But again, it's going to be a tall task versus this great rush defense. And this Bengals defense, on the flip side, probably won't do all that many favors for Joe Burrow because it is a struggling unit as well. And the only way we see the Steelers potentially losing this game is if Big Ben somehow doesn't play due to COVID procedures, but I don't think that'll be the case. Obviously, that's something to monitor. But assuming he plays, I mean, look, James Conner, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, I think they will have their way with the Cincinnati defense. And even though the Bengals offense has a lot of talent, I just don't see them overcoming this Pittsburgh defense. I love the Pittsburgh Steelers outright. And the spread -7.5, I think that should be higher, so I will take the Steelers on the spread as well. Next up, we have got the Seattle Seahawks at the LA Rams, NFC West divisional clash. The Seahawks 6-2, tough loss versus the Buffalo Bills, where they kind of really weren't in that game throughout. While the Rams 5-3 coming off the bye week. This is historically a clash between these two teams where the Rams specifically are huge nuisances to the Seattle Seahawks, regularly play them close or even split the series. So to some extent, seeing them as favorites at -1.5, not all that shocking. But let's give some credit to the Seattle Seahawks. Yes, they played a poor game versus the Bills, but that was also an uncharacteristically poor performance from Russell Wilson where he struggled with turnovers. We don't think we're going to see that 2 times in a row. And this Seattle Seahawks team is disciplined. Yes, defensively might be another story, but offensively, they've got the pieces. Look, Russell Wilson will bounce back. Chris Carson, whether he plays or not, we think the Seattle Seahawks have some pieces there to be all right in the rushing department. And Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are 2 great wide receivers. Now, speaking of great wide receivers, let's look at it on the side of the LA Rams because Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods are also in that conversation. And they've got the easier matchup here versus the Seattle Seahawks secondary. I think this is going to be a very high-scoring game. Jared Goff and those two wide receivers versus Russell Wilson, who I still believe he is in the MVP consideration despite one bad performance. We're going to see a lot of fireworks here. I 100% think it will be a very close game. And even though the Rams have the edge defensively, I think at the end, it's going to come down to Russell Wilson versus Jared Goff. And in a game where we expect Russell Wilson to limit the turnovers and it might be a one-possession type of situation, we're going to go with the more versatile, trustworthy quarterback that is Russell Wilson. Don't let one bad week in Week 9 kind of cloud your judgment. We're going with the Seattle Seahawks, who would technically be underdogs. So outright and on the spread, we wouldn't fault you if you want to, hedge your bets with the Rams or something like that. But right now, we think in what should be a very close game, the way to go is with the Seattle Seahawks. Next, we got the San Francisco 49ers at the New Orleans Saints. The 49ers, 4-5, and unfortunately for them, the story for the year has been injuries, offensively, defensively. Last week, we saw what that team looked like without Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle, and the result was an expected loss. While the New Orleans Saints, 6-2, probably coming off their best game of the year versus the Tampa Bay Bucks, and they're trending in the complete opposite direction, is now they're getting back healthy and big-time weapons offensively. Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, we saw a spark in that offense with both those guys reintroduced offensively. And for the 49ers getting back to them, look, unfortunately, the case for the time being will be no Jimmy Garoppolo nor George Kittle, and that'll probably be the case for the rest of the year, in fact. Now, yes, the 49ers were also without guys like Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel and Bourne last week. Those guys are tentatively expected to return versus the New Orleans Saints. But let's be honest, their upside will be limited due to the inconsistencies of Nick Mullins under quarterback. But again, this isn't really the fault of the 49ers. They've been one of the most injury-riddled teams throughout the year, offensively and defensively. Now, it doesn't help that they have to go into New Orleans and play the Saints at their home field. I expect a relatively easy win for the New Orleans Saints here. I love them outright. I think this is a simple pick here on the money line. On the spread, New Orleans is at -9.5. I'm not all that worried about that number. I think the Saints can really win by, similar to what we saw with the Green Bay Packers and the San Francisco 49ers, close to 2 touchdowns, so give me the Saints on the spread as well. On to Sunday night, we have got the Baltimore Ravens at the New England Patriots. The Ravens, 6-2, coming off that victory over the Indianapolis Colts, while the New England Patriots, 3-5, took down the New York Jets, and for a week maybe made some people forget about the offensive issues that they have had. But folks, don't let that game versus the Jets fool you. That was a game where the New England Patriots were honestly down pretty much for the majority of it and had to rely on a long field goal as time expired to get the victory. They should have had a more resounding victory versus the New York Jets of all teams. So imagine what the hell is going to happen versus the Baltimore Ravens. It's been almost 20 years since the last time the New England Patriots were almost touchdown dogs at home. But hey, that's what'll happen when Tom Brady leaves town and this offense continues to be void of weapons. Cam Newton has to do it all by himself. The accuracy isn't there. He has to rely on his legs. But that's kind of a similar situation with what the Ravens have with Lamar Jackson. Obviously, the difference is that Lamar Jackson is younger. He doesn't have the injury history that Cam Newton does. And he's got a better defense, and we think that's what will be the difference maker here. We like the Baltimore Ravens to win this game. I think Lamar Jackson, with his more explosive nature at this point in time during his career compared to Cam Newton, will be tougher to game plan for, tougher to stop with this New England Patriots defense, which has also been underperforming. So for that reason, I am taking the Baltimore Ravens here on the road. I think that defense will have a lot to say in this matchup, and Cam Newton will probably return to his former struggles that we saw prior to that Jets game. And like we said before, the New England Patriots plus 6.5 on the spread. And honestly, I don't see any reason why they can keep this game close. Only maybe if there's weather conditions or if Lamar Jackson completely implodes. But I think this is just a bad matchup for the Patriots, so I will take the Ravens on the spread as well. And finally, getting to Monday Night Football, we've got the Minnesota Vikings at the Chicago Bears, divisional clash in the NFC North. The Vikings 3-5, coming off a win versus the Detroit Lions, where yet again the theme was Dalvin Cook running wild, and that's when this offense is at its best. While the Chicago Bears 5-4 couldn't get it done versus the Tennessee Titans, we saw the same old story here. The offense couldn't be consistent throughout. The defense kept them in it for a while, but ultimately just couldn't keep up with the opposing team in the Tennessee Titans. Now, I guess if you're a Chicago Bears fan, you might be throwing yourself a mini celebration because Matt Nagy made the announcement that he will not be handling play calling duties offensively in this game. We'll see how long that lasts, but maybe that's a good thing. Now, obviously, in my opinion, this offense wasn't only struggling because of play calling, it was also struggling because of poor play on the offensive line. And even more importantly, poor play at the quarterback position, just inconsistencies there. So I'm not really quite sure that changing play calling will solve all the issues. But hey, we'll see what happens. What's important here is the matchup itself, because regardless of who's calling plays offensively, I like the Chicago Bears in this matchup as underdogs, which is kind of wild to me that they're almost 3-point underdogs at +2.5 at home versus the Minnesota Vikings, a team that they match up very well against. And honestly, the Chicago Bears these last few years with similar types of rosters have fared very well versus the likes of the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions. So let's keep that in mind because, like we said earlier, the winning formula for the Minnesota Vikings has been a stout performance from Dalvin Cook. And I don't think that's going to be the case here versus the Chicago Bears defense, which is a tremendous unit. We saw what they did versus Derrick Henry this last week. So that'll mean, well, Kirk Cousins will have to beat them through the air with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. And don't get us wrong, those guys are very good as well. But this Bears secondary is also very good. And we're not sure that Kirk Cousins can beat that matchup. While the Chicago Bears, as bad as Nick Foles has been, they've still got Allen Robinson. Whether David Montgomery plays in this matchup or not, I'm not all that worried about it. I think they can cause some issues, specifically for this Minnesota secondary with Allen Robinson, with Miller, with Mooney. And I think they come out of this game victorious. I really do. It'll more than likely be a lower scoring game, but this is a plus matchup for the Chicago Bears when you consider the Minnesota Vikings defense. It's a plus matchup when you consider the turnover nature of Kirk Cousins and the great defense that the Chicago Bears have. So I really like the Chicago Bears, not only outright, but also on the spread, where right now they are laying 2.5 points. So I am taking them there. So with that, we wrap up our pick'ems. Now looking at our locks of the week, let's start with the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Green Bay Packers. This one is simple. The Packers will absolutely decimate this Jacksonville Jaguars defense. We expect huge games from Rodgers, Jones, and Devontae Adams. At the end of the day, it's Luton versus Aaron Rodgers. Give me the Green Bay Packers at home all day. Then Tampa Bay Bucks at the Carolina Panthers. I just don't see the Bucks losing 2 straight, especially considering how bad they got beat versus the New Orleans Saints. Statistically speaking, Tom Brady has big-time rebound games after those type of performances, and this Carolina defense, I think, will be the subject of the first big blow-up game of Antonio Brown this season. Then San Francisco at the New Orleans Saints. Give me the Saints here. No Jimmy Garoppolo, nor George Kittle. So many injuries for the 49ers. Unfortunate, but makes this one an easy pick. Go with the Saints. And then finally, Baltimore at the New England Patriots. I will take the Ravens here. I think that defense shows up and causes issues for the New England Patriots and Cam Newton. So I will take the Ravens on the road. So with that, we wrap up our Week 10 NFL game picks. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, and also give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin so you can see our thoughts on these games as we get closer to kickoff. And better yet, go to our website at alldaypigskin.com and sign up for a free newsletter to get access to these games even earlier on in the week. All those details in the description. But for now, we'll see you guys in future videos.